Hi, welcome to the Divine Insight Show. Thank you so much for joining us wherever and whenever you're doing so. I am so excited to introduce you to this week's guest, Phil Goldberg, who's been studying the world's spiritual traditions for more than 45 years and has authored or co-authored some 25 books over the years in over a dozen languages. And he's here with me today to talk about his most recent book, Spiritual Practice for Crazy Times. Phil, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, Travis.
Thank you again. And for those who are new to the show, I also want to mention that you can go back to iTunes and my website on the show page and look into the archives when you were on before. And we talked about your previous book, The Life of Yogananda. And for this book that we have now today, it's going to sound like a rather ironic first question, I believe, but given the topic of your book, Spiritual Practice for Crazy Times, Powerful Tools to Cultivate Calm, Clarity, and Courage, why did you write this book at this time?
I didn't write it at this time. I wrote it last year.
So premonition over what was to come?
No, well, maybe. I'd like to take credit for that. People keep praising me for my incredible timing. And, but the truth is, I conceived of the book early in 2019 because times were crazy then. They seemed tame by comparison. But things were nuts then, and a lot of people were struggling. They were angry, they were afraid, they were worried, they were, in a state of turmoil. And I noticed that even people with a deep spiritual life were neglecting their practices because of the agitation and all that. And I thought, no, this is wrong. This is exactly when we need spiritual practice. And so, given that times were crazy last year, I wrote the book, and it was went through editing and proofreading and the whole thing. And we scheduled it for August of 2020, thinking things will be even crazier then because the election will be close. And then the pandemic hit. And it took us, everybody by surprise. And we didn't go back and change anything. I just added a little paragraph to the preface for two reasons. One, there was no time. And two, the material in the book is timeless. It's as relevant today as it would have been in 1968, or as it will be 20, 30, 40 years from now, because any time can be crazy. We just happen to be right now in the midst of unprecedented craziness. And so the only thing we changed was to make the ebook version for Kindle and the other platforms. They cut the price to $1.99 so more people could have access to the help that the book provides.
Wonderful. And one of the things that I noticed is something that you just mentioned before, just a moment ago, and that you talk about a little bit more in depth in your book. And I'm curious your observations around, why do you think when times are crazy or even they get bigger and all these additional unanticipated global massive events happen, why do you think we have a tendency to avoid doing the things that we might most need, like supporting ourselves spiritually?
Well, that doesn't apply to everybody. In times of crisis, it's common that people turn to the life of the spirit, depending on the spiritual orientation they have. But in ordinary times, if it weren't for social distancing, I think you'd find in a time of crisis more people coming together, and if they happen to be religious or spiritual, they would come together with people who share their orientation and their path. So churches and synagogues and so forth might fill up more in times of crisis. This is an unusual one because of the pandemic, but other people people who value spiritual practice, not just the sort of congregational stuff. The reasons I hear are they're too agitated to meditate or to sit in silence or do mindfulness or whatever the practice might be. And the other is they're so busy, they're trying to do something about the conditions of the world, whether it's just in their local area or, you know, campaigning for a candidate or whatever it might be, doing social justice work, marching, that they don't have time. They see spiritual practice as a luxury, something you do when you have some free time. And I try to counter that in the book. And frankly, much of my work for 40 or 50 years, and treat deep spiritual practices not as a luxury and not as just a sort of something, you know, you do casually, but as a regular in this sort of ongoing maintenance, like we get exercise and we, you know, eat and we brush our teeth and we bathe and we service our cars and, you know, change the batteries. And, you know, we have ongoing maintenance. And to me, a daily spiritual practice is ongoing maintenance, not just for the soul, but for the body and the mind. If I had to change one thing in this book because of the pandemic, it would be to point out that spiritual practices, you know, we have a great body of research on practices like meditation and mindfulness that show they strengthen the body, they strengthen the immune system, they keep us calm in the midst of turmoil, they reduce stress. So they have tremendous value. And as for the objection that people don't have time for it, in my experience, when people do a practice that really works and they do it long enough to see the impact it has on their lives, they start to treat it as an investment and make it a regular thing, even if it means cutting back some, you know, 20 minutes or a half hour of something else, something trivial or frivolous. And the reason for that is it has real results in one's life. And it provides, in the book, I say that we have within us a sanctuary of peace. That sanctuary of peace is also found a fortress of strength and a platform for acting more effectively in life. You come out of these practices with more of a capacity to stay calm in the midst of turmoil. You have more compassion, you have a bigger heart, you have more clarity of mind. So your actions can be more effective. It's not an escape. It's not cutting off the world. It's a temporary respite to recharge your batteries. It's like, you know, an athlete taking a break to you know, get some rest before coming back into the game. Or, you know, it's warm-up time. It's, you know, there's many metaphors we could use. But, and so I've encouraged people with an active life to recognize that the need for going within and then coming out will make their actions more effective. And I also encourage people who need self-protection and relief from the stress and the anxiety and the fear, that the inner peace that we have within us can not just be experienced, but brought forth, you know, as we go about our business. Yeah. Long answer to your question, but there it is.
Fantastic. You answered a few others that are to come, but what are some of the most common myths about meditation that you've heard?
One, the most important is that it's, well, there's several. One is that it's only for certain people, you know, sort of esoteric people or people with a particular skill, or otherworldly people. No, I know CEOs who meditate. I know, you know, scientists who meditate and study meditation. Um, and the other myth, and it's an unfortunate one, is that it's difficult.
Mm.
Good meditation practices are not just not difficult, they're actually easy and simple and something anybody can do. There are meditation practices and mindfulness practices that require mind control and effort and skill at concentration. But there are others, and the ones I favor, especially for everyday use on one's own, are effortless. They require not trying and not trying to control the mind, but letting go. And that has to be learned. But once learned and once remembered, it makes meditation something anybody can do and benefit from.
Yeah, thanks. And it reminds me of one thing that I hear quite frequently, which is that it seems sort of ridiculous because people assume meditation is just sitting still. So they just say, well, I can't sit still for 15 minutes. My brain just keeps going. And if that's the practice you engage in, then of course you're not actually meditating. You're just sort of planning your day or engaging in a conversation with yourself.
Yes, and part of that is people read about meditation and they hear people advocating meditation. They read a superficial magazine article and it says, oh, meditation reduces your stress and you know, it quiets the mind. So one of the results of a good deep meditation is the mind settles and becomes more quiet. People mistake that for instructions.
Mm,
It's a result of meditation. And so they think, oh, the way you meditate is you make your mind quiet. So they sit down and they say, okay, I'm going to make my mind quiet. And the mind keeps being busy because that's what the mind does. It thinks. And then they try to make it quiet, and the trying just makes it more agitated. It's like, I'm going to go to sleep. You know, you don't try to go to sleep. You just let go and sleep comes. You can't go out on a Friday night and say, I'm going to fall in love. No, you can't force that. You can't make that happen. It's a natural thing. If you want to go off a diving board, you do certain things in preparation, you set up the conditions, and you let go and gravity takes over. That's what a good form of meditation is. It's allowing a natural process of allowing the mind to settle down. It doesn't mean there won't be any thoughts. It doesn't mean you won't be busy planning your day also. You know, a good meditation practice, you know, will acknowledge that there will be periods of many thoughts and periods of more quiet in any given session. And that's fine. The act of trying to force your mind to be quiet just is frustrating. And then people give up and they say, I can't do this. I'm not cut out for this. I don't have the proper skill or talent. What they really lack is proper instructions. And when they get that, they realize, you know, anybody can do this. It's not difficult, or some of the misconceptions begin to fade away when you have the experience.
yeah. So how do you suggest that folks begin a meditation process if they haven't started one before?
Well, these days, there's many qualified teachers. I always advocate, if you can, getting personal instruction from a teacher who's been properly trained and certified. You can look online for this. Of course, there are videos and audios, and I consider them effective, but not as effective as a personal teacher. But I have instructions in the book. I also created an audio that anybody who buys the book can request, and I'll send it to them to make it easier. But the thing is to also be well informed. I have a whole chapter on the different kinds of meditation, things you should keep in mind if you're looking for a meditation that works for you, and to be a discerning consumer. But at the same time, I offer a few different practices with careful written instructions in the book and the audio tape.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful. I tend to encourage folks, sort of like when I suggest that folks might go for an acupuncture. Maybe they'll try one and it doesn't work for them. Well, there are so many different styles and types that you might not
Right.
resonate with it immediately. So it's not an opportunity to limit yourself and to give up, but to say, okay, well, that I'm not experiencing what I was hoping. So trying something different. I do encourage folks,
Right. And
like,
that's when they call my wife, who's an acupuncturist, and say,
so one of the things that struck me about your book that I think is helpful, and I actually tend to talk about this when I do teaching as well, when folks feel anger, I usually say, if you're feeling angry, the best thing you can do to get yourself out of it is to go be generous to someone. Go do
that's a,
something kind for somebody, because that shifts the energy. But one of the things that you talk about is about gratitude is the ultimate thought replacement. Can you share a bit about what you mean by that?
yeah, well, I have a chapter in the book about the importance of framing our experience in certain ways and shifting from toxic thoughts, fear, rage, all these things that, are known to cause problems related to stress in the body and upset the mind, agitate the mind. There's a long tradition in yoga, philosophy, and now in psychology of shifting. And it's not just a simple question of replacing a negative thought with a positive thought, because that has to be done skillfully. And I have a whole chapter and sections around how to do that. And what you said is a very good addition to it. And I do also have a whole section on service and the importance of doing for others as a way of getting you out of your own troubles and your own cycle of negativity. I singled out gratitude because the research on it in the last few years is really extraordinary. People who do these simple gratitude exercises, like writing down something they're grateful for before going to bed, or first thing in the morning, or listing 5, or whatever it is, there's variations. They tend to have measurably better health and recovery from illness. Mental health measures tend to be improved. It's really interesting. And when you think about it, if you just do it and you're upset, you're angry, if you just sort of shift to something you're grateful for, you feel differently almost immediately. And there's always a lot to be grateful for. I mean, even in the midst of this crazy crisis, like, for example, you remember when New York City was the height of the center of the pandemic, and I grew up there, and my brother's there, I have friends there, and everybody was worried, everybody was anxious. People were dying, people were very ill. And every night, people came to their windows and applauded the healthcare workers. That's an act of gratitude. It's an act of extreme appreciation. Even in the midst of the crisis, they felt better for expressing the gratitude. The people receiving the gratitude certainly felt energized, and their hearts were warm. They were more motivated to do what they do. And just anybody seeing the videos felt better. That's an act of gratitude. And it was a collective one, but we could do that. You know, I'm grateful that I'm not among those who are suffering in a tragic way from the pandemic. But that gratitude is also tempered by compassion for the people who are suffering. And we can hold both of those, and both of those feelings, both of those attitudes, being grateful and also being compassionate and being concerned. They're healing. And they also can lead to constructive action in the world, for doing something that will make things a little easier for other people or a little less crazy in general.
Yeah, thank you. And you also share an important tip, which I suppose can also be thought of somewhat of a cliche, but that actually works, which is taking a breath. In times of extreme turmoil or anxiety. You suggest taking several deep breaths, but also breathing with the abdomen. Can you elaborate a little bit on that technique?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you're right. It sounds like cliche. You're upset, someone says, take a deep breath. And they say, you know, it's a cliche because it works. There's some calming, but I add to it, you know, certain details and nuances that are known, again, in the yoga tradition for hundreds or thousands of years, but also now being verified by scientists who study these things. If you breathe in by extending your abdomen like a balloon while taking in the deep breath, you'll get more oxygen into the lower parts of the lungs. It's just a physiological reaction. So that alone enhances the value of a deep breath. The other thing, and again, there's a lot of interesting research on this, how you exhale matters. And there's different ways of exhaling. You could just exhale normally. You can exhale forcefully, like, you can exhale in a series of forceful breaths. And the other aspect of it is to extend the exhale. So breathe out more than you normally would before taking the next inhale. And the proportion of like breathing in to a count of 4 and exhaling to a count of 6, that extra 50%, is measurably beneficial with respect to what's going on in the nervous system and the lungs and all that. And you find it just reduces the tension and stress in a easily discernible and, as it turns out, quantifiable way. So you're doing that a few times. And I have, you know, sort of specific instructions in the book. These things matter, and they're instantaneous sort of interventions. Like we talked earlier about having a regular spiritual practice, and that to me is a centerpiece. But then the rest of the book is about interventions that we can do at any time to tap into that inner sanctuary of peace. Deep breathing is one of them.
Yeah, thank you. And as you were describing the technique of exhaling completely and even more than you might inhale, it reminds me of like the physical therapy technique where they use resistance in stretching, where you might stretch to a moment and then they say, okay, now engage the muscle and then apply pressure and then relax, and you realize that you actually can go further into a stretch. And also I also encourage folks when I'm doing meditation to actually unbutton the top button of their pants. And
Yeah,
so many of us are trying to fit so tight into our pants, literally
yeah,
from
yeah,
a
yeah.
physiological level, our guts are pushing up into our lungs, which occupy the space that we would otherwise have available for a
Yeah.
deep breath.
Yeah, no,
And so,
that's very true. When I used to teach meditation on a regular basis back in the 70s, we would say that, unbutton your collar, unbutton your belt, just loosen things up. And
right,
the yogis know that. I mean, they wear
right.
elastic yoga pants and, drawstring so that easily loosened up. But yeah, you want to just remove all those restricting things that cause tension, and take off your shoes, for God's sake. There's little things you can do.
Yeah, and I love that. I mean, here it is, just for those of you watching who can see the video. This is it's such a um, accessible read. I think sometimes we can get into sort of more esoteric conversations about spirituality, which can seem inaccessible and sort of out there for folks and impractical in that sense. So I just want to share for folks that this is a very easy to read and easy to access tools. So I think that is so helpful, and I want to just share that as well with
Thank you.
folks. Yeah, you're welcome. And so as we get towards the close of the show, I just want to ask, is there anything else that you'd like to share about your book or your work, as well as how folks can find you?
Oh, well, let's to the last part first. The easiest way to find me is on my website, which is philipgoldberg.com. I'm also on Facebook. I have an author page on Facebook. What is it? Philip Goldberg author, something like that. And my website has ways to email me, or you could sign up for my mailings, which I do. I don't do that often. I don't want to be obnoxious, but I have valuable things in there. And also my podcast, Spirit Matters, where we have an archive of close to 250 interviews with spiritual teachers and leaders of all kinds. It's a great resource, especially these days when people have time on their hands. And it's free, and it's my service and my co-host service. Do I have any final messages? Yes, I want to remind people, deep within them, at the core of what we are, is what I call the sanctuary of peace. We are already at peace. We are already in the light. We are already in touch with our the cosmic energies and intelligence and love. We need methods to bring us into that sanctuary, and that's why I wrote the book, and that's why I emphasize the practical aspect of this. There's theory and wisdom that I drew from the great spiritual traditions because people need a framework for this, but I kept that simple. There's plenty of places to get philosophy and theology and, the great teachings of the world. But I drew from those sources what I consider practical and usable. And I'm very grateful to my publisher, Hay House, for making it in this nice little easy format to carry around and use. And of course, it's available as an audiobook with me narrating. I always say we couldn't get Morgan Freeman.
I was just going to say that. That's so funny. The voice of God.
Yeah. But also as an ebook, as I said, for $1.99 only. So if you read on Kindle or your computer, you can take advantage of that and use that savings to buy copies for your friends.
Wonderful. Yes.
But,
well, thank you so much for the incredible wisdom and insights that you'd shared with us today, as well as those in your book. And I really appreciate your time today and sharing yourself with our audience.
Thank you, Travis. Great to be back with you. And I should say, because we mentioned Yogananda, that we're recording this on, what is it, September something or other.
14th, yeah.
And on the 19th is the 100th anniversary of Yogananda coming to America.
Oh, wow.
And so that's a centennial worth celebrating. And I have to say, he was an inspiration in writing Spiritual Practice for Crazy Times as well. So just wanted to mention that.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thank you all for watching and listening. It's no accident that you're here. Take great care of yourself and have a wonderful day. All right.